On this episode of the Naturist Living Show, naturism in France and research into objectification.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show is brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. At Bare Oaks, we offer traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Free your body, free your mind. www.bareoaks.ca.
Welcome to episode number 38 of the Naturist Living Show. My name is Stéphane Deschaines, and I'm your host for this episode, and I'm also the owner of Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. And I want to start by thanking everyone for sending in all the comments and notes and suggestions and just general encouragement, which is really, really appreciated. I can't read them all anymore, but occasionally a few come up that are interesting, which I want to share with you. One of them came from Jochen. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing your name properly. I apologize if I'm not doing quite right. I'm guessing from the spelling. Jochen is from Germany. And he writes a fairly good long email, but I'm just going to quote to you the part that I want to talk about. He says, "I'm not sure if naturism has to be a philosophy at all. I mean, it's just getting a connection to nature. Do we really need to build a philosophy around that? Do we need clubs, magazines, and podcasts for that? Aren't we making something as natural as naturism into something special by giving it so much attention?" And that's a good question. And as I discussed in episode 30, there certainly is a difference in the types of naturists that are out there. There's the what I call the recreational naturists, and then there's the more ethical naturists. And the difference is whether you're just enjoying it, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, or whether you're realizing that there's a lot more to it than just taking your clothes off. I've always maintained from the beginning that naturism is a life philosophy, and it's not about taking your clothes off. It's about respect for self and respect for others and getting closer and more respectful of nature and our natural environment. That taking your clothes off is much more of a tool to get to that level, and that's the more ethical naturist way of looking at it. And why that's a philosophy is because you have to look at the branches of philosophy that contemplate ethical issues and the right way to live. And there's been many philosophers talking about how we should live. And if we all lived as naturists and it was natural, then we wouldn't have to talk about that. It wouldn't be a philosophy because it would be the way everybody lived. But, I suppose it could be a philosophy, but people wouldn't be as aware of it because it would be the standard of living, the typical way that we thought. But we don't, as we've discussed many times in all of these episodes. Seems it's very much a recurring theme. Society is screwed up. We have really messed up the way we look at ourselves, at our bodies, at each other. We have over-sexualized and made us all feel bad about ourselves and what we look like. We have distanced and divorced ourselves from nature to the point that we feel that we're somehow above it and separate from it. So naturism is a philosophy because it tries to solve all these issues. It says that by living the way we do, by thinking the way we do, it's a better way to live. So that makes it a philosophy by most definitions of what philosophies are. And while not everybody lives that way, I think it's important that we promote it as a philosophy and as naturists that we recognize that it's not just fun, which it is, but it is a lot more than that. It's a better way of being. It's a better way for society to progress. And it's a way that, sadly, far too few of us understand. So we have to spread the word. I also got a great email from Maya, and rather than read it myself, I thought I would just give her a call and ask her to read it for us.
Hi, Stefan. It was just a couple of months ago when I was searching for more information on the theater show Montparnasse, hoping that I would still be able to watch it somewhere in Toronto, when I discovered your podcasts. And even though I was a little bit disappointed when I figured out that the show wasn't on anymore, I was delighted to find much more than I was looking for. The whole philosophy of naturism, well thought through and presented in the best possible way, honestly and simple. So first of all, thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights on such a beautiful concept of living. I was lucky not to have to get into naturism. Being raised by my mom, who has been a naturist for all her life, I hardly knew about textile beaches when I was a kid. I grew up in Belgrade, in Serbia, which is part of former Yugoslavia in Southeast Europe in the late 70s and 80s, at the time when naturism was flourishing on nude beaches along the beautiful Adriatic coast, and haven't stopped practicing it ever since. Of course, my husband and I are now raising our 7-year-old daughter in the same spirit. We moved to Canada 2 years ago and soon enough found Bare Oaks, where we spent 2 great weeks last and this year. I've caught up with all the episodes, and on top of their informative value, many made me think of naturism from different perspectives. I particularly enjoyed the 3 parts on nudity and human body, the vitamin D episode, Barely Proper, and the one on fashion. Your podcasts also helped me to understand better a general attitude toward naturism here. So I'm not so surprised anymore by a weird look in my colleagues' eyes when I tell them that I'm a naturist. And I can see better how the fact that my daughter has to wear a bathing suit top when going on a summer school trip is related to deeply rooted fear of nudity. On the other side of Atlantic, we've never experienced this sort of fake morale, and honestly, we expected that Canada would be more open-minded in terms of nudism. Please keep questioning why this society is so ashamed of its flesh and what contributes to this fear. I think that only through this broader sociological approach can we fully understand what level of beauty and harmony naturism offers to modern society. You've already discussed some of the causes of misconceptions about naturism. Presumptions that nudity is only about sexuality, the conflicting media messages about self-acceptance, religious prejudice, and etc. And I would like to add to this list something I've noticed as a newcomer to Canada. That is constant focus on presentation, appearance, outside, form, staging, facade, decoration. There is no place for modesty. People are actually learning skills that would help them look confident in public. How to look at each other's eyes, how to adjust their voice so it sounds confident, how to use their hands when talking, how to cross their legs, etc., etc. At schools, kids are learning how to present from their early age, and sometimes they are marked only for presentations, not for knowledge. So it looks to me that due to this focus on making a good impression and due to an increased worry about what others think, the essence, real content, real self-acceptance is lost. It's more important to show self-confidence than to be self-confident. This is, of course, completely opposite to naturism. Its goal is being confident by getting to know yourself, accepting your body, mind, sensitivity, fear, sexuality, and respecting all of that. For me, naturism has always been about getting under the surface, about removing layers of clothes, personal fears, social pressures, and our ignorance toward nature. It would also be interesting to hear more about some socially more acceptable movements and beliefs, such as environmentalism, green initiatives, respect for diversity, and how they are all in line with parts of the naturism philosophy. Thank you again for the inspiring podcasts. The idea of having it only as audio file is brilliant. I look forward to hearing the new one.
You know, France is often regarded as the mecca for naturism. Naturism is generally agreed that it started, modern naturism started in Germany. But today, France is really the place where there are the most naturist, the biggest resorts. It's the French government even has a department within the Ministry of Tourism to promote nothing but naturist tourism. They have brochures that are created by the government that are sent all over the place. It's not just a big movement. It's not just mainstream in France. It's big business as well. The government in 1974, under the Pompidou government, as it was known in France, created the district of Cap d'Agde. They took Cap d'Agde is a city of its own, and they took a section and created a naturist district, if you will. And it was paid for by the government. It was 500 million euros, and it was a huge development. There's 2 kilometers of beach, and there's stores, and there's high-rises and buildings and gas stations and everything you can imagine, and you can be nude all the time. And most people who are naturists for a while have heard of Cap d'Agde because it seems like this sort of ultimate destination. There's also very, very large resorts like Montalivet, Euronat, La Génie, Arnaoutchat. Those are all very big summer destinations with tens of thousands of people attending those for their summer vacations. And they are also little villages within those areas, perhaps a bit more natural than a Cap d'Agde. Millions of French citizens vacation every year in those resorts or on the beaches or on the hundreds of clubs that are throughout France as well. But as advanced as that is, and as in a way it's more advanced than we are, but it's also telling us a little bit about where we might be going. And it's not all perfect, and there are problems out there. Cap d'Agde has been in the news a lot in the last few decades. Either too many dressed people or too many sexually liberal people, no standards. Everything is driven Cap d'Agde by commerce instead of naturist philosophy. So there has been a lot of concerns over that. And I ran across this program that was done in August of 2011. It aired on the M6 network in France.
Ici, on coupe les portables et on n'a rien.
C'est quand même plus agréable d'être nu que d'être habillé.
Il n'y a plus cette barrière, je mets des vêtements pour me camoufler, ça sert à rien.
Je la trouve belle toute nue.
Ici, nous, on vit nu.
Ça nous aide à être à l'aise avec notre corps.
Il n'y a pas que les cul nus, il y a nous, les gens habillés.
On retrouve des sensations qu'on a perdues. C'est un retour aux sources.
Ouais. C'est une drogue et j'ai pas encore trouvé le médecin pour me soigner.
Est-ce qu'on a le droit de juger les autres si le seul critère est leur apparence?
Voilà.
Là, on n'a jamais eu ça avant.
Tout ça, c'est englouti au profit de la luxure.
C'est la robe Cap d'Agde. C'est sexy, transparente.
Pas que s'amuse avec d'autres filles, c'est très sympa.
The program is called Zone Interdite, which it means forbidden area, forbidden zone. And it's a really excellent current overview of naturism in France, both good and bad. You see the naturists, the ethical naturists who have the pure view, and you hear from them, and you hear the people who are more the sexually liberal, who are looking for swinging and partying and that kind of thing. You hear from those who really just want to be nude for part of the time or in the pools. You hear the more, again, ethical naturists, the ones who see it more as a lifestyle, complaining about all the dressed people around the place all the time. Some of the problems we're certainly seeing in North America, and problems that could certainly get worse if we don't defend the naturist values, if we don't recognize the philosophy, and if we don't try to remain pure and really fight against those who would exploit naturism, which would destroy the philosophy that we've created. So the show was really good, but of course it was in French only. And so what I've done is spent quite a bit of time actually doing French subtitles and putting it up on Bear Oaks YouTube channel. I'll put a link to the video itself on the show notes, which is, as always, at naturistliving.bearoaks.ca. Bear Oaks, B-A-R-E, of course, O-A-K-S.ca, because we are in Canada. And it's well worth your time to go and watch a show. It's about an hour. Just a side note, doing subtitles is really, really time consuming. I think I've spent over 20 hours putting this together. Not just because I had to learn a new technology in order to do subtitling, but because translating is not as simple as some might think. If you only know one language, you may not appreciate the nuances between languages and the role that culture plays in language. When you translate, it's not a mathematical equation. You don't go, X equals Y. You have to get a better sense of it. And the example I often give is synonyms are supposed to be words that mean the same thing. And if I give you the example of mad, the word mad, according to my thesaurus, synonyms are irate, annoyed, vexed, irritated, indignant, irked, furious, enraged, infuriated. Now, those words are all synonyms, but I'm sure you recognize that they have different nuances, different strength. Some are madder than others, are angrier, infuriated, enraged. These are words, the imagery you get to mind is somebody who's really mad, almost to the point of losing it, where somebody who is irritated is just a little annoyed. Yet those words are all synonyms, and it's the same thing. A word in English and in French may sound the same, but because of culture, they have come to mean different things. One of the most obvious examples is whenever I go to a restaurant, there is a section with the entrees. The entrees in English are the main courses, as most of our listeners will know. But in French, entrée means to enter, entrance. And on a menu, you do find the entree, the entrees. And the entree are the appetizers, which makes sense, of course. Somehow, though, in the history of restaurant menu writing, in English, entree has become the main course as opposed to the appetizer. I don't know why. Other examples is the word agréable is a good French word which sounds just like agreeable. Probably is the same word. But in agreeable, I'm not going to explain what it means. We all know what it means in English if we're listening. But agréable means either pleasant or comfortable. Not at all the same thing as agreeable, which means something agrees with you or you're agreeing with someone. And one of the words in here which gave me an awful hard time is libertines, which is actually an English word as well, but not a word which is in common usage. A libertine is a person who is very sexually free, liberated, easygoing, basically kind of sleeps around with whoever, has no issues with doing anything, and very few morals around sexualities. But it's not used in English. It's used much more commonly in French. And it does represent not just swingers, but a whole group of people who are fairly easygoing about sexuality. And so I did use the term a little bit in English subtitles because it is a proper English term, but then decided to lean more towards a term sexually liberated or sexually liberal. Because there was no word exactly like it other than libertines, which most people don't use on a day-to-day basis. So if you have a chance, go to the YouTube channel and watch the show. I think there's a good lesson in there for us as naturists in North America that this may be our future as things develop and business takes over. We already have examples of large resorts in North America where money rules and naturism and the philosophy and the values do not. And we have to be very vigilant and make sure that we stick to our ethics and standards and the philosophy if we want it to continue to flourish and mean what it means to us. I ran across an interesting article in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. It was by a number of people, but the lead professor is Dr. Kurt Gray from the University of Maryland. He works in the Mind, Perception, and Morality Lab. And the article was More Than a Body, Mind, Perception, and the Nature of Objectification. And of course, why that's relevant to us is we've talked in the past about the objectification of the body and sexuality and related to pornography and all that. And it's still very relevant. But in his study, he came to some interesting conclusion. He wanted to see what objectification was. And before we kind of talk about that, we have to define things about it, because he talks about agency versus experience. Agency, when a person has agency, it's the capacity to act, plan, and exert self-control. In other words, being kind of a thinking, intentional, willing being. Whereas experience is the capacity to feel pain, pleasure, and emotions. And the first thing they found, which was interesting, was that the objectification, or the ability to focus on the body, was equal for both men and women. They both reacted the same way. What he found is that taking off clothes, revealing skin, nudity in other words, does change the way that people perceive the person. But unlike the traditional view of objectification, they didn't see that people without clothes are mindless objects. But they saw them as having a different type of mind, a different way of being. What they said was, according to their experiments, is that seeing somebody as a body strips him or her of the competence, the ability to think, of the ability to be a leader. And that happened even without nudity. If they just focused on the body, or they forced them to focus on the body even when dressed, you still had that effect. So essentially, a person who is nude is seen as more of an experiencer, one who is more capacity to feel pain, more vulnerable, more into pleasures and emotions, and less into thinking and leading. Which, of course, that suggests that revealing flesh and can be bad in terms of an employment situation. But my question that I had after this was, that is in the traditional textile world, of course, but in the naturist world, some of these preconceived notions when you see somebody nude may not exist. And of course, we don't know the answers, but I thought I would call Dr. Gray and ask him the questions directly. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate that.
No worries.
I haven't read the article because I guess I have to subscribe to the journal or something. I saw the press release, which resulted in a few press articles around. So if I sound like I don't know all the details of your research, that's probably why.
Okay. Just so you or whoever else is listening knows, the article is also available on my website. So if you just kind of Google me, it'll pop up.
The full article is available?
Yep.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Excellent. So that was an interesting piece of research. I guess I should start by asking you what motivated you to look into this area.
Well, a couple things. Most of it stemming from just how this whole idea of objectification has been traditionally framed in the literature and in kind of broader society. So most people assume that when you see someone kind of as a body, right, as a sexual object, you see them as an object and you totally strip away their mind. Additionally, most people think of this phenomenon as something that happens when men perceive women specifically. And so what we wondered is whether, one, this occurs for when anyone views anyone more as a body, and additionally, it doesn't involve the total dementalization or wholesale stripping away of mind, but instead confers a different kind of mind.
Interesting. So how would you define objectification then in a more, clinical, technical way?
So how would we define, the term objectification is just the idea that when you see someone as an object, so you fail to ascribe them the kind of mental states that are normally ascribed to a person, and you just see them as an object. So in one study that a colleague of mine ran, she found that for men who are very hostile, when they viewed women in bikinis, the area of the brain that lit up was associated with tool use and not mental states attribution. So that's kind of traditional objectification, whereas we wanted to see if in fact focusing on the body didn't lead to objectification, but instead led to a redistribution of mind, is what we called it.
So, briefly, what were the conclusions?
So what we found is that indeed, when you see someone as a body, or the more you focus on their body, the less you see them as capable of agentic states like doing and planning and acting and intentions. But in fact, the more capable you saw them with experiential states. So feeling sensations, emotion, being sensitive to experience, things like that. So it's a redistribution of mind.
So nudity is not necessarily objectification then. Is that the right conclusion then?
Exactly. Whether it's nudity or simply, one study we just had people focus on the body in their mindsets. So ask people, how attractive is this person versus how professional does this person look? And even just simply kind of focusing attention on the body doesn't lead to objectification, but instead to perception of a different kind of mind.
So, but you did say that one of your colleagues did a study where certain men looking at women in bikinis, there was objectification going on. Is that right?
Right. So this was a subsample of men who are known to be highly hostile or show lots of hostile sexism. So perhaps for those men in particular, this holds, but I wonder if it goes the other way, if you have kind of hostile issues against men for women. I'm not sure. That's kind of, random speculation. But so there is a subsample of people who show this, but in general, and we ran over 1,000 people in just one of our studies, we found that this kind of compensatory effect, less agency, but more experience.
And so how would you translate that in layman's term? What is when you see somebody nude, how would you treat them differently as a result?
Well, I think what the research suggests is that you would treat them less in terms of their goals and their plans, and more in terms of what they're feeling and their experiences. And in one of the studies, in fact, in the final study in this paper, we wondered if objectification or seeing someone as a body is always a bad thing, because, traditional feminist scholars, for instance, suggest that seeing someone as a body is always a bad thing. But if seeing someone as a body leads you to ascribe a different kind of mind, then there might be situations in which it's actually good to see someone as a body. And so what we did was asked people to administer a series of electric shocks to another person. And what we did was we got them to shock someone who is either fully clothed or someone who is naked from the waist up. And what we found is that relative to the person who is clothed, people gave fewer electric shocks to the person who is half naked, because they were viewed as a body and more vulnerable and more sensitive to experience. So it suggests that, when you have this kind of mindset to protect someone, this kind of nakedness can lead you to protect them more.
That's very interesting. It's interesting because as a naturist, as I'm sure you know, we believe that, that the way we view each other's bodies is artificial, and that we can normalize that situation. But we also say that as a result of doing that, a lot of naturists report, in fact, I would say most naturists report that when everybody's nude, they're having more personal, open, intimate, not a sexual intimate, just more close conversations and connections with people, which you might say agrees with what you saw in terms of that experiment.
Yeah, and I also, from the point of view of being sensitive to other people's experiences, that maybe is one reason why that's the case, right? You're just more in tune in realizing that someone has experiences. It seems with this protection idea, right? It seems like naturalists don't go around fighting each other,
No. No, it's certainly not about aggression, but it's also a fight against the objectification, or at least the mainstream concept of objectification that people say happens out there. It's very hard to objectify a completely nude person because they seem like one whole entire being, especially when you're nude yourself. But you certainly do see the discomfort of the people who come in to our world, if you will, who are not there to visit, to participate, but are there because they're delivery people or something like that. It's always interesting that way. Do you, I would, try to suggest that the wearing of the clothing is what causes the objectification. Now, would you disagree with that possibility?
Well, I think the issue is it's just what you're used to, and that's what's the context, right? So I think again the idea of objectification, as kind of described by the term objectification, isn't quite right. So I think seeing someone in clothes gives them a different kind of mind than being naked, and that kind of mind is maybe someone who's more agentic, who kind of is more intentional, who acts more. This would have to be borne out by research. What I would suggest is that perhaps maybe naturalists have a different baseline for viewing people. So perhaps you and your colleagues view a naked person as already having significantly more agency when they're naked than someone who typically wears clothes.
Right.
But I would still suggest that the kind of same phenomena are at play, and that might help explain some of the kind of benefits of being naked around your peers. Would you or anybody that you know suggest that this reaction towards the nude body versus the dressed body is innate or learned? That is a very sticky question, and one that I don't have an answer for. I think those questions are very difficult, but certainly it seems to be innate, this kind of discrepancy between viewing the physical world, and sometimes the body goes into that, and viewing the social world. So the kind of deeper explanation behind this effect that we hypothesized is this kind of idea of dualism. So the idea of dualism is that people typically perceive the body to be distinct from the mind, right? So if someone dies, then their soul goes on to heaven, right? And if you think back to kind of ancient philosophy, there's this idea of, there's a mind that's put into the body, and it has to kind of grapple with the body's seething passions, right? And so we separate the kind of human world into these higher cognitions and these lower passions. And that's what this effect kind of suggests, is that when you see someone as a body, you see them more in terms of these passions, and when you see someone more as a quote-unquote mind, or perhaps more clothed, right, you see them in terms of these cognitions. Right. But to me, it seems inherently obvious to me that kind of perception, when people are clothed, as seeing them more as a mind, that has to be learned, because we didn't spend most of our evolutionary time wearing a bunch of clothing all the time. Right. Yeah. So that could be right, or maybe clothing just kind of increased perceptions of agency. So I definitely wouldn't argue that you're kind of born with this innate sense of objectification, but certainly you're kind of born with this sense that people are different from physical things, and souls are different from bodies, and out of that you can kind of bootstrap different perceptions. But I certainly wouldn't make claims about innateness, one way or the other. No, well, I understand. As a scientist, it's hard to. You don't want to be making any claims. There's a lot of literature throughout, the last century that I've read, because this is a topic that's interesting to me, where there's assumptions, for example, that children might have natural sense of shame when they reach a certain age and feel the need to cover up. It seems odd that we make assumptions based on the way we are now and the world we are in, as opposed to starting with a theory that we have molded and shaped the world
to make us who we are. And the obsession with wearing clothing all the time for reasons other than protection, I don't know how it can be assumed that could in any way be a normal, natural thing, given the million years of evolution we've been around. Of course, we weren't there, so maybe we were always ashamed. We just couldn't find anything to cover up with.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely with you there. I don't think, if you look cross-culture, there's wide variation in what kind of clothes people wear. And I don't think that kids have natural experiences to the world wearing clothing without kind of being culturally conditioned first. There's certain many things that are inborn or more or less innate, but I don't think shame to being naked is one of them.
Okay. Now, can you tell me also, you were talking about, in the article, talked about the morality side of nudity versus dress.
Yeah, so it's kind of linked to this idea of this protection, but one of the kind of theories I'm developing suggests that we view others in the moral world as kind of one of two ways. One is as a moral agent, so someone who does moral acts like a hero or a villain, and one is as a moral patient, someone who receives moral acts, so like a victim or a beneficiary. And what we found in the study is that those who are seen, more in terms of their body are viewed more as moral patients and less as moral agents, because again, moral agents are connected to this doing and acting and attention, as moral patients are connected to feeling and sensing. And so the more you see someone as a body, then the less blameworthy you think they are for doing bad things, and the more sensitive you think they are to being harmed.
And would you say that's probably extends even further if you take a uniform into account, perhaps, like something that of authority in terms of being a moral agent?
Yeah, I think there's definitely other things that are going on with the uniform, right? Because they've been culturally imbued with this sense of authority. But it is interesting to know how much uniforms cover up, right? I mean, you have high collars and hats and things like that that cover up kind of maximum amounts of skin. So I think they're probably designed to make the wearer seem maximally agentic and either good or evil, as opposed to someone who doesn't wear a uniform.
Right. There was a social psychologist in France who described a number of different types of nudity. There was nudity, practical nudity, for example, where you're showering or whatever. There was sexual nudity. Obviously, naturist nudity was some slightly different, another kind of nudity. But they were talking about nudity then as a for power, where in order to torture people or to control them, they use nudity. And the most extreme example of that, of course, were the Nazis during the war, stripping people down as they came into the concentration camps. Is that, and obviously they were trying to make then the patients feel like moral patients, if you will, the victims, I guess. Do you think that's what was going on there? Is that why we do that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's part of a broader phenomena because we associate status and things like that with clothes, right? And if you're, right, look, Jews were reasonably well off, and so if you strip them of suits and things like that, right, then you reduce them in status. There's also this kind of intrinsic link between, nakedness and animality, right? So animals don't wear clothes, and we perceive animals in kind of the same ways that that we found here, right? Worthy of protection, sensitive to harm, but not able to be held accountable, right? So if a puppy does something bad, you don't put it on trial. You just say bad puppy and kind of move on. So perhaps what the Nazis were trying to do was kind of emphasize this animality and strip them of their kind of higher cognition.
Interesting. So was shame, embarrassment, offense, did that come in at all in what you studied?
No, no, because we only did kind of perceptions of others as opposed to how people feel themselves. And the other thing is we did it kind of in the kind of realm of what people are normally seeing. I mean, speaking of kind of shameless, one group that we did investigate in terms of perceptions of were adult film stars. So in the one study with 1,000 people, there's this book out called XXX, 30 Porn Star Portraits. And for psychologists, it's a perfect book because it has amazingly controlled stimuli. So this photographer took pictures of film stars fully clothed and film stars fully naked in the exact same poses with the exact same lighting and the exact same facial expressions. And so it provided kind of this unique sense of, investigating how people did it in a very controlled way. And yeah, people didn't seem ashamed when they were rating these stars, and I don't get the sense that these stars felt ashamed to be pictured either.
The other question is, what is nudity? There's different levels of nudity that make people feel different ways. My personal observation. So, if I was to wear knee-high socks, shoes, a shirt, a hat, long sleeves, and mittens, but no pants, people would call me nude.
Right.
Whereas if I was wearing just shorts and in the summer, nobody would suggest I was nude, even though in that case I might have more showing. Similarly, women wearing bras and underwear might be described on the street as nude, but not in a bikini, even though the clothing may actually be less revealing in their underwear. So right. when you were talking about nude, you meant full nudity in that case, generally speaking.
Yeah, although we did look at bikinis in the first study, and just topless men, which we kind of see all the time in the last study. I mean, even just focusing on someone's kind of biological functioning. So in one study where we assess morality, we described someone in terms of how fast their heart beat. Right, so just focusing the attention on the body, and we got effects that way. So this appears to happen no matter how you do it. Whether it's kind of physical displays of nudity or mindsets or just focusing attention on biology.
So nudity may not actually be that important of a factor. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think nudity is a powerful way to introduce a bodily focus.
Okay.
Especially for people who aren't used to seeing others nude. If you're a naturist, I'm not sure that a kind of manipulation would be as powerful, right? Because you're not, you're used to seeing people who are nude all the time, and so you might have to be creative in emphasizing the body in more ways, for instance. But certainly for kind of average person, showing someone in a bikini or even naked or shirtless, focuses attention on the body enough.
Yeah, I mean, and it's it's. The shock, the effect that you get is, I think, is obviously learned, because it used to be that you could do that just by showing a leg, whereas that really doesn't have much of an impact anymore. But there was a time where just showing an ankle or a leg was quite racy because you never saw it, and therefore got people's attention.
Yeah, and so in one of the other studies, we looked at the kind of role of sexual suggestiveness. And it exacerbated this effect. So the more kind of suggestive a pose was, the even less agency you ascribed, and the more experience you saw. And so again, perhaps if you're used to seeing people naked all the time, right, kind of nudity loses its sexual suggestiveness, and further would undermine this effect.
So where are you going next with these studies?
Well, I think what I'm interested in terms of these studies is demonstrating times at which a kind of bodily focus is a good thing, because it probably doesn't argue against your experience or your theorizing, but a lot of the literature out there, especially kind of feminist theory, suggests that seeing someone as a body is always a bad thing, and so where I'd go in the future is saying when it's a good thing, and when it might be a good thing, for instance, is in the bedroom or with a significant other, right? You want to be attuned to their desire and their body, for instance, intimate encounters, and so this might be a good time to see them as a body.
So are you saying that part of what your study might suggest is that it may not be negative to objectify? I noted one of the key words in the abstract was pornography. Do you think that the effect of pornography may be overstated?
That question is a minefield.
Sure.
So pornography is a different and a very multifaceted thing, right? Are we talking someone in bikini or kind of aggressive, violent pornography? And I think in a kind of impersonal sense, right, pornography or seeing someone just as a sexual object is probably a bad thing. But what I'm suggesting is that in a kind of personal sense, right, if you have a relationship with someone and you already conceive them as a mind, right, sometimes it can be good to seeing them as a body. For instance, if you have a spouse that you always think about in terms of their acts and their deeds and talk about work and things like that, right, sometimes you just need to think of them as a body, as someone who experiences to kind of, right, connect with them intimately. At least that's it.
Right. Well, it's almost like you need a new word other than objectification, because that one's become so loaded.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so we call it a redistribution of mind, but that's not a great term. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. Right, but it's the kind of crux, even though it has a bad name, is still the same, that sometimes it's okay to see someone as a body because it doesn't dementalize them, but instead redistributes that mind. The other kind of condition or limiting condition that I expect is the case, although I hadn't tested it, is when you perceive someone as just a specific body part, right? So in the pictures we used, you kind of always showed people's faces, and then you can still appreciate them as kind of a person, right? But you can imagine cutting someone off at the neck and at the stomach and just viewing their breasts, for instance, in the case of women, right? I would guess that might objectify them because you're really just seeing someone as a body part. And so to the extent that pornography kind of focuses or highlights specific body parts at the expense of a whole person view, I could imagine that objectification still might hold.
Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think that'll make an interesting podcast.
Great, yeah. Happy to help.
And if you ever want to bring in naturists into your studies, I think that would be an interesting twist. You feel free to give me a call, and I can help you get in touch with people.
Yeah, I will definitely think about it. When you emailed me, I definitely was open to the possibilities, right? It's always neat to do kind of unique samples that should have different effects on a theory, and naturists are certainly a unique sample for this kind of stuff.
Well, that's all for this episode of the Naturist Living Show. Thank you again for listening. My name is Stéphane Deschênes, and I'm your host for this podcast and the owner of Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park, just north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. You'll find links to all the items that we talked about in the show notes, and those show notes are found on our website at naturistliving.bareoaks.ca. That's BARE oaks.ca. Keep sending those comments, those suggestions, those emails. I really do appreciate them, and it does keep me going. The show's email address is naturistliving@bareoaks.ca. .ca, of course, because we are in Canada. Join us again in about a month for the next episode of the Naturist Living Show.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show was brought to you by Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park. Traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Traditional values means that naturism is more than just taking your clothes off. It is a life philosophy with physical, psychological, environmental, social, and moral benefits. Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park strives to promote those naturist values in a modern setting that provides the amenities and services that our members and visitors expect. Free your body, free your mind. Learn more at www.bareoaks.ca.